On Easter Sunday, 1987, in the mountains of Southern California, biologists set the last trap in a multi-year capture program. This decision had been years in the making. There was no consensus among the experts. Some insisted on the capture, while others were strongly against it. Because catching the last wild bird of this species meant officially admitting that a wild population no longer existed. That morning, a large bird with a bare, dark head, dark plumage, and a wingspan of almost 10 feet was caught in the trap. It was designated AC-9 and given the name Topa Topa. This was the last known wild individual of the species on the entire planet. The species in question is the California condor. The bird was moved to an enclosure where the few other surviving condors already lived, and with it, the total population of the species, both wild and in captivity, reached 27 birds. By that point, biologists faced an almost impossible task: how to even bring back an entire species from such a small group. After all, this bird only begins to breed around 6 years of age and lays just a single egg about once every year or two. And even if they managed to restore the species to several hundred birds, could they survive in the wild next to the most dangerous predator on Earth? Man? The California condor is considered the largest flying bird in North America. An adult's wingspan exceeds 9.5 feet, and its weight can reach 11 kilograms, making the condor a true giant among the continent's birds of prey, with few that can compare in size. The condor's plumage is dark, almost black, and on the underside of its wings there are broad white stripes that are clearly visible even from the ground. The bare head is not without reason. Feathers would quickly get dirty while feeding on a carcass. Individual birds can live up to 60 years, which is a rarity among wild birds. The condor can soar to an altitude of up to 15,000 feet and glide there for hours, barely flapping its wings, simply riding the updrafts of air. The lineage of the California condor goes back much further than it might seem at first glance. Tens of thousands of years ago, mammoths and saber-toothed cats roamed the territory of modern-day California. And giant ancient birds, the teratorns, soared in the skies above them. When the Ice Age ended, the megafauna vanished almost all at once. Mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and the teratorns themselves, whose wingspan rivaled that of the condor. For a scavenger that fed exclusively on carcasses, this meant an almost complete loss of its usual food source. The California condor survived where the teratorns could not. It switched to carrion along the coast, and the carcasses of beached whales and other marine mammals became its new dinner table for thousands of years to come, helping it survive this catastrophe. The California condor has practically no sense of smell, which is a rarity among birds that find food by scent. Instead, it relies on its sharp eyesight, circling for hours at high altitudes over its territory and spotting prey below, also taking cues from the behavior of other nearby scavengers. By quickly getting rid of the bodies of dead animals, the condor prevents them from rotting in the open for weeks, and thereby curbs the spread of disease among local wildlife. Without scavenger birds, animal carcasses would pile up and attract disease carriers and rodents. The population of the California condor plummeted to catastrophic levels throughout the 20th century, and a whole range of factors contributed to this. The open lands of the American Southwest were actively developed and converted for agricultural use, and with them disappeared the vast territories where the condor was accustomed to searching for carrion. Farmers and ranchers would set out poison bait, trying to wipe out wolves and coyotes to protect their livestock. Condors, feeding on the same carcasses, died by accident, simply being the unintended targets of the poison. And sometimes they would lose entire broods from a single piece of bait. On top of that came collisions with high-voltage power lines. For a bird with such a massive wingspan, This was a deadly new kind of obstacle that simply hadn't existed a century before. Illegal trapping by taxidermists and the hunting of bird eggs for collections completed the picture. Lead turned out to be another source of death. Condors would eat the carcasses of animals shot by hunters and swallow tiny lead fragments left in the wounds along with the meat. Even a tiny dose of this metal proved fatal for the large bird. Dichlorodiphenyltrichloroethane, widely used as a pesticide in the mid-20th century, seeped into the ocean and built up in the tissues of marine animals that the coastal California condors fed on. And this caused the bird's eggshells to become thinner. The egg would crack under its own weight before the chick had a chance to hatch, and the species' natural reproduction was blocked by two factors at once: fragile shells due to the pesticide and lead, which was killing adult birds before they could produce offspring. By 1982, the combination of all these factors had pushed the species to the very brink. There were only 22 California condors left in the wild, while all the others were already in captivity by that time. By the mid-1980s, biologists faced an agonizing dilemma. Threats continued to claim the lives of the last wild California condors, and the question of whether to capture every last remaining bird and move them into a captive breeding program was being seriously debated. A portion of the scientists were strongly against such a decision. They believed that if the species was destined to disappear, the bird should go out free, not behind bars. And the very act of capturing the last wild individuals contradicted the very nature of the wild world. The debates raged on for several years, and neither side could find a simple answer. Ultimately, the decision was made to capture all the remaining wild California condors and place the future fate of the species entirely in the hands of the captive breeding program. For the sake of saving the species, people had to create methods that had never existed anywhere before. And they didn't have to wait long for proof of success. In 1988, the first chick born in captivity hatched at the San Diego Zoo, and they named him Moloko. For the team of biologists, the birth of this chick was the first living proof that the 27 remaining California condors were actually capable of breeding in captivity, meaning the entire program, one that many had doubted, truly had a future. To raise the chick without it becoming a tame bird deeply attached to humans, the San Diego Zoo used an unusual approach, specifically feeding it with a puppet shaped like an adult condor's head, while the keepers remained completely hidden from the chick's sight the entire time. The idea was simple. If the chick never saw a human near its food, it would grow up able to recognize its own kind. This was exactly how they raised the chicks named Shannon and Wessa. And for years, keeper Ron Webb held the puppet over the feeder, never letting the chick see him. The method didn't work perfectly the first time around. The first condors that were fed with the puppet and released into the wild showed strange behavior. They would land on rooftops, approach people, and perch on dangerous power lines, risking their own lives. The whole problem was the lack of adult condors around the young birds, since it was the experienced members of their species who could have taught them how to behave properly in the wild. One of the first people to notice this problem was Michael Mace, the curator of birds at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. They found a solution pretty quickly. They started releasing the young condors with more experienced mentor birds. In the presence of their older peers, the youngsters gradually picked up the right habits, and risky behaviors, like landing on power lines, became less and less common. Puppets and mentorship didn't solve all the problems by a long shot, because the program was still short on the chicks themselves. That's when they brought in another technique, double clutching, designed to get a single pair of condors to produce 2 chicks a season instead of just 1. Condors lay 1 egg every 1 or 2 years. However, if you take it away shortly after it appears, the pair will often lay a second egg in the same season. The keepers would place the first egg in an incubator and leave the second one for the parents to hatch. This way, the number of chicks available to the program nearly doubled without any harm to the parent pair. It was the combined use of several methods at once, puppets, mentorship, and double clutching, that made it possible to restore the species from a tiny group of birds living in captivity. In 1992, 5 years after the species was officially declared extinct in the wild, several captive-bred California condors were released into the wild for the first time in the mountains of Southern California. To avoid putting all their eggs in one basket, biologists decided to establish several independent wild populations in different parts of the range, since a disaster in one region shouldn't be able to threaten the entire species again. The birds were released in the mountains of Southern California, at the Vermilion Cliffs on the border of Arizona and Utah, and also in several other locations along the California coast and on the Baja California Peninsula in Mexico. In 2003, for the first time in many years, a California condor chick born to wild parents not raised in captivity by humans fledged in the wild. Nothing like this had happened since 1981, which is almost a full quarter of a century. Even biologists, who had dedicated decades to studying the California condor, were genuinely surprised by this discovery. In 2021, geneticist Oliver Ryder, along with his colleagues from the San Diego Zoo, published the results of rigorous genetic studies. These tests proved that 2 chicks had hatched from unfertilized eggs, completely without the involvement of a male, even though both females were living side by side with fertile partners at the time. The species had nearly vanished due to a catastrophic shortage of individuals, and here were 2 chicks born without a male at all. This became the first confirmed case of its kind among birds that had free access to a mate for breeding. At the same time, both chicks that came into the world in such an unusual way never reached adulthood, despite the keeper's best efforts. There is another side to the California condor's story, one that has nothing to do with genetics or enclosures. For biologists, the return of the species meant saving an endangered animal. But for the native Yurok people, it carried a much deeper meaning. In Northern California live the Yurok people, who call this bird pregonish. For centuries, the condor has been the embodiment of the spirit of peace and renewal for the tribe, and its feathers have held a special place in the most important ceremonies meant to restore balance to the world. When the condor vanished from Yurok lands in the early 20th century, the loss was felt far more deeply than just the disappearance of a rare animal from the region. The tribe saw it as a break in their own tradition and a loss of a living connection to their ancestors. For nearly 2 decades, the Yurok tribe has been building its own program to bring the condor back to its land. This involved assessing the level of contamination in the area and establishing partnerships with Sequoia National Park, as well as with federal wildlife services. In 2022, the first California condors were released into the wild among the majestic redwoods of Northern California, in a region where the bird had not been seen for over 100 years. Tiana Williams-Clausen has spearheaded the program through every stage. The lead that was mentioned earlier still remains part of this story. By 2019, California had banned lead ammunition for hunting, yet lead continues to be the primary cause of death for wild condors. The sources of lead poisoning are not just limited to legal hunting with modern ammunition, and compliance with the ban is still far from complete. Some hunters continue to use old ammunition, and animal carcasses with lead fragments still end up being accessible to condors. Lead turned out to be far from the only modern threat to the species. In 2023, an outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza claimed the lives of about 21 birds in just a few weeks, which was nearly a fifth of the population on the Arizona and Utah border. Ashley Blackford, the Species Recovery Program Coordinator, led the emergency response to this outbreak. To save the condors, for the first time in history, it was necessary to urgently test a flu vaccine on them that was originally developed for poultry. The species also faces a more slowly growing threat. The more successfully condors reproduce, the more birds live in the wild and in captivity today. But practically all of them still trace their lineage back to the small group of ancestors that survived the 1987 roundup. To prevent inbreeding and the diseases that come with it, each breeding pair is selected according to a strict stud book, which tracks the ancestry of almost every living bird all the way back to those very first few ancestors. For the current population of free-flying California condors to be sustained in the long run, several conditions are necessary at once. Real enforcement of the ban on lead ammunition, not just its formal existence, and an expansion of the avian flu vaccination program. In addition to this, careful management of genetic diversity through the stud book is essential, as is the continuation of programs to reintroduce the birds to new parts of their range. For example, on the Yurok tribe's lands among the redwoods, where the condor was able to return after an absence of more than 100 years. Let's go back to Easter Sunday of 1987, when human hands held the last wild bird of this species, AC9, named Topa Topa. At that moment, the entire species consisted of 27 individuals, and every single one of them was in captivity. Today, free-flying flocks of California condors soar over the mountain ranges of Southern California, over the Vermilion Cliffs, over the Big Sur coast, and among the redwoods on the lands of the Yurok tribe, in places where the species was once thought to be lost forever. The species has already been brought back from a small group of birds that were entirely dependent on humans. The next challenge is much harder, to ensure the condor no longer needs constant saving from lead, disease, and a shallow gene pool, but instead stays in the sky on its own.